That was beautiful. Okay, Irene, you hear me? Okay, you hear me, Irene? Do you hear me?
It was muted. Okay, yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, let me just turn the chair around. So I do have somebody on Zoom, which is a pleasure. Thank you. I forgot to send you the newest sheet, but we're going to start with the one on the Yiddish language, and then you'll just listen, and I'll send it to you separately. But,
no problem.
From when I get back.
Thank you.
My pleasure. No, wait, what do I do with my reading?
Let's mute me.
Don't worry. Thanks, if you're listening carefully. I just always like to start with a review, so bring us off to date. We're going to start today. So last time we were talking more about the historical of the Jews and how they came to live in Poland and Pennsylvania. So they were invited in by kings. What made it, I think, so enticing was that they were given charter rights, so that unlike where they were coming, the bulk of people coming from Germany, the conditions were terrible, constantly being expelled, and their lives were highly limited. Here, the king in Poland and Lithuania wanted them to come in and said he would protect them from any attack. And at the beginning, things were very, very good. The big break is going to be in 1640. So up until then, life is good. They are starting to filter in slowly. End of the 13th, 14th century, 15th century, they sort of reached their height in the 16th century, right? And into part of the 17th century. But as I said, besides the fact that they were invited in, kings of Poland, Brandon wanted to establish a middle class, which would bring more wealth, into his land. The bulk of the people living there, they were first. They were tied to the noblemen. They were a literate group of people. So he wanted this middle class to come in. And we start off with Boleslav V is the first one in the 13th century, and then we have the third into the 14th century. Again, these charter of rights, and so that not only come in, but I will protect you, I'll take care of you. And another thing that probably really appealed to them is that they were granted autonomy, internal autonomy. They could conduct their communities in any way they saw fit. They had their own schools, and the government didn't interfere whatsoever. So this was great for them, because of being so highly controlled as they had been, coming from Western Europe. They could breathe more freely. They couldn't engage in certain types of occupations. Most of the land is owned by noblemen. And then eventually there was, things became more powerful overall. The one thing though that really ends up, booming Jews is that they are pointed out and and over time, obviously, we got massive growth, and we also concentrated on the fact that the Catholic Church brought all those, those same ugly antagonisms against the Jewish people. So we were blaspheming their God and the host desecration, all those ugly things which have come already from Western Europe, they are still existing. And the church population, the peasants, they're very ignorant, they're very superstitious. And then they would go to church, they were good Catholics, they go to church, and they would hear all these harangues, from the priest, blaming the Jews for everything. That's still their God. And this will take hold more and more of the general population. We talk about Boleslav, we talk about Casimir III. The next important king that I want you to remember is a Jagalo, that's Jagello. And his dynasty ruled for almost 200 years, Poland, Lithuania. Actually, a Duke of Lithuania, but he married a princess, right, of Poland. And that's when the country became united. It's called the Kingdom of Poland / Lithuania. And it was a mighty empire. It was covered a vast territory. And I would say that during that almost that entire 200-year period, things are basically very good for the Jews living there. But it will start changing. It'll right. Some point in that 16th century, there will be some sporadic attacks against the Jews. I mean, ultimately, they will be put down. They're not like very widespread, but well, as you say, in the 17th century, really when that will be 1648, the Khmelnytsky massacre. But we'll do a split unit just on those massacres and let you understand. Now Ukraine, I think, all the time. Now here, Ukraine is part of Poland, but part of Ukraine has ties to Russia. That's why Russia is trying to make claim to Ukraine. And then in that eastern portion of Ukraine, they actually speak Russian. They're not speaking their own unique Ukrainian language. So that's why he felt Putin thought it was perfectly fine to go in and take Crimea for Russian-speaking people there. And that's why that the whole Donetsk region on the eastern border with Russia, again, officially part of Ukraine, but that's why he's laying claim to that whole area. Now, we haven't talked about Kiev quite yet, but there are starting to be Jews living even in the earlier centuries. So, we talked about that there were Crimean Jews, and then they went further northward and westward. So those would have been the ones who would have, been that area. So, our claim to that entire region goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And we're no longer welcome, but basically almost everything. We are living in Italy at this point, but again, we're constantly being expelled from one region to the other. Forget Spain and Portugal, right? We're expelled from 1592. England, 1290. France, well, there were 3 times. The last one, the more final one's 1394. So, where are we supposed to go? And during this whole, the later time period, we're talking about that, like let's say that 1600 is sort of like a pivotal year. And remember, Jews are now the Spanish Portuguese are returning to Holland and then to England. So, but the rest of Europe, I can assure you there were Jews living probably, in these countries, but they cannot live openly as Jews. Things start changing in France at a certain point when we study France more eventually. I'll let you know what happened. Conversos, they're basically hardly anybody living in Spain anymore who are openly can no longer live openly as Jews. And in Portugal, when they bring in the Inquisition, also they can't live openly as Jews. But again, I had stressed this to you. The Jews who went to live in Portugal after 1492, they wanted to live as Jews, unlike the ones who decided to remain in Spain. So those who were Portuguese Jews and returning, later on to Judaism, they are really the Portuguese Jews, not Spanish, Portuguese Jews. And then, there's huge migration. Of course, they went probably either to Africa or Italy, and then they went to the Ottoman Empire, also being invited by, the Sultan to come and live there and contribute to the, which was good in the beginning years, but then the whole Ottoman Empire sort of goes on for the Jews economically. So what we're going to do today, so now I hope you have like a little general overview of what's going on. So during this Jagiellon, dynasty, I told you things were basically quite good for the Jews, although there'll be a transition later in starting in that 16th century, all right, of some more outward manifestations, of antagonism against the Jews, and some they're widespread, with some actual physical attacks upon the Jews. In some cases, they were arrested and tortured and then burned at the stake, Spain, with the auto da fe. All right, so just bear this in mind. Meanwhile, we're now developing our own language. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit more. How did Yiddish come to be? So if you want to, I'll do it with you. We'll read it together. And so I'm going to sit down. Hopefully you can, if not, I'll stand up again. Okay. It's not like it's an auditorium that's, on an incline. You can see a speaker on the stage. Okay. Again, so how did Yiddish come into being? The language spoken by the masses of Polish Jewry came to be known as Yiddish. Yid, Jew, Jewish. It developed as a result of social and political conditions. It was a source of unity among the people who spoke it. I mean, it was comfort. We get like a comfort language. Yeah, that it was only, my father was born in the United States, but until he was 5 years old and had to go to public school, to kindergarten, he only spoke Yiddish. He only really learned English, and he, started going to schools. This is just so interesting. I mean, now we have all these day schools. Thank God, in the, throughout the United States. But those days, everybody went to public school. And then you would go to your cheder afterwards. A long time studying. But everybody went to public school. Exactly. You can understand, though, why so many Jews eventually did assimilate, because then they were open to this, the general culture here, and their ties, just kind of dwindled over time, especially as a generation went. Okay. Again, it was a source of unity among the people who spoke it, and it also led to misunderstanding with the neighbors who did not speak it. I can almost see how resentment would have built among the native Poles or Lithuanians, because now we have this huge population living in our midst, but they're not speaking our language. So, that's making another barrier. Maybe, as I said, it was a comfort to the Jews that they had their own, secret language, but it's just causing, more hatred among the locals. How come you're not speaking Polish and or Lithuanian or Ukrainian, depending, where you lived? Yiddish was long despised, this is interesting though, by the very people who spoke it, and certainly by those ignorant of it. They all recognized it. So again, in the home, out on the street, in the shops, they would be speaking Yiddish, but they knew it was like a jargon, that it wasn't like a bona fide proper English language. Right, sure. It's a conglomeration, right? Right. Well, eventually it came, but we're not talking until, more the period of the house. We're talking about more into the end of 18th, 19th century, that Yiddish came to be, accepted, with rules of grammar and, but then it was, as you said, it was a hodgepodge, but it was only spoken by the Jews. It became this Jewish language. So let's see what happens. I mean, they had to know a minimum, right, of the native language. I mean, they did have to interact with the non-Jewish neighbors, but the language at home and in the schools, it again, if let's say a Jewish person came into your shop, you're talking Yiddish. Go ahead, Maria. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, right, exactly. So this language is going to be, again, I don't know who gave it the moniker Yiddish. Did we start describing that language as that, or did the Yiddish? Yeah, yeah, right. So it became sort of like a hated, you know, term. Um, and right, can you imagine you're on the street or even in the shop and you're speaking Yiddish to your fellow Jew, a non-Jew comes by or comes in to purchase, and this private little conversation phone, they can't understand it, and that's a lot of animosity as a result. I mean, we look about Yiddish to almost look to a certain measure of nostalgia, you know, but they certainly not. Zeus had always spoken the language of the land which was their home. Right? Everybody had to know certain basic words. But for example, in Arabic and Muslim Spain, yeah, Ramba, some of his, like Mohammed Muslim, these were works in Arabic. All right, they were later translated. Right, but that became later. That's part of the Ottoman Empire. It's Ladino. But when they lived in Spain, right, they lived in Portugal. They Spanish and or Portuguese. They didn't have their own separate language there. I mean, even like in in London, they or based on the BB in the Escoba, that's the main Spanish synagogue in Amsterdam. I don't think what anymore, but that part of the liturgy was in Portuguese. So they definitely, knew that language. Ladino is strictly the language of the Ottoman Empire. So it was, the Jews who lived there. And it also became sort of like their secret language that they would speak, among another. Why? I'm just going to come to it now, but I'll introduce it. Because Hebrew was considered the language of the educated Jew, right? And even in earlier days, when the Jews started becoming merchants and tradesmen, engaging in import-export trade, when they dealt with a fellow Jew, whatever land they lived, the language that was incumbent to them was Hebrew. And all the official documents would have been written in Hebrew. And so many of the Sfarim that are built, now that they're speaking whatever language they're speaking, in whatever country they are living in. But when they would write a sefer dealing with anything with, halacha or parshanut, interpretation of in Tanakh, they wrote it in Hebrew. And that's why we could read these before Shub, because it's a beautiful Rashi, you have to Rashi script, to follow it, but it's Hebrew, he just developed, living in France, but he obviously spoke French, Rashi, yes. Yes, right. And more of a German. Right, it could be, and that's why resentment would have arisen because like why can't you speak a proper German like everybody else here is doing? You know, mm. Because I think it was a comfort to them and a unifying factor among all the Jews living in that particular. Listen, I remember going, with my parents to Israel in 1963. And my father didn't know, Hebrew, but he would meet somebody, he really liked going to Shiva, he was speaking Yiddish to them, you know. I mean, to this day, you go to certain sections, right, or certain areas in Israel, speaking in Hebrew, it's it's just part and parcel of their culture, and they don't want to give up. I remember when my father told me, thank God he didn't do it, that when he went away to yeshiva to learn, I guess I don't know if he went before bar mitzvah or right after bar mitzvah. So my Zeta insisted that he had to write him letters in Hebrew. Then he would correct the letter and send it back to me. So as a result, that's, that's why I told you all the Sfarim are written in Hebrew, At a later point, we'll have more things in Yiddish, but, it became more of a cultural phenomenon. But again, we're not talking about till after the Haskalah, up until then, it would be strictly, everything would be written. All right, so let's go on. On. Okay, so they would speak Arabic in Spain, North Africa, the Middle East, French, obviously, Germany. And obviously, we talked about Italy before, but you would speak Italian if they lived there. And why was it? They were thoroughly familiar with Hebrew and Arabic because we were a very learned population, great stress on education. So every the boys with the girls to the minimum, we didn't know how to work that. And so you would have been so familiar with Hebrew and Arabic. You could see why did that it sort of mingle with the local popular language, because they're learning Hebrew and Aramaic. How they're learning and spending hours a day, with these languages. They also obviously, know the language of the country. And they're sort of like combining them. That's what happened over time. Okay. And obviously, because both Hebrew and Arabic are the languages of the Torah, the Talmud, the prayer book, okay? And other sacred books. So whenever somebody would write a sefer in those days, they wrote it in Hebrew. I mean, you could read something in the Rambams or Rambams. It's beautiful, it really is. It's like a Bahaya. You can fully, understand providing enough Hebrew, right? So, lovely, very, very literate. Right? It became natural to mix expressive Hebrew words or phrases together with the native language. Just think of English. How English has incorporated so many, words. Obviously, the basic language would be Latin, but then there's some French words, there's some Italian words. Obviously, there's even some German words, but they're all part and parcel, and we accept them. That it's English. Okay. Well, initially, this mixture of languages appeared in discussions centered on religious life. And initially, let's say you were in the yeshiva and you were studying, obviously you were reading and discussing Hebrew, Aramaic, right? And more certainly Aramaic. But you had your native language, and as various discussions one with the other, you would end up combining. Listen, I know people speak Yiddish, and they have all these English words mixed in. Or I remember once taking when I lived my year in Israel, buying a Hebrew newspaper to improve my knowledge of Hebrew. And I'm looking at it, to figure out what the heck. It was an English word which they wrote, in Hebrew. So they knew I was mixing them all up. Okay, eventually it would be things dealing with religious life, but eventually this jargon was carried over into secular discussion. And certainly in the home with the mothers and the children, this is what they were, around the table, father would come home from work. This is, when expulsions and persecutions eventually brought about a wider separation between the Jews and the non-Jews, the result was a growing dissimilarity between the intimate languages spoken by each group. I think I might have mentioned this to you. So I remember my father said when he went to, he has speaker from Rabbi Yosef Ohana, why you didn't exist in his day. So he actually went to city college. So some of you had foreign language that was part of, so you could, no, not Hebrew. I don't think Hebrew was taught in those days. So they took German, thinking, they could get away with it because but boy, they words that my professor would look at. It was not German. Okay. I some good stories from my father over the year. Then came the migration of Jews east. All right, so remember, we're initially talking about some of those Eastern, so to speak, coming up, from um, uh, the Balkan area, uh, yeah, okay. So they're not speaking Yiddish yet. But when this mass German came, that's what changed everything. Okay. Um, in the Slavic lands of Bohemia, I don't know, I think Bohemia was pretty close to German, but Slovakia certainly got Slav. Okay. Poland, Lithuania. The Jews were completely separated from German-speaking people, except I would say really like Prague. First of all, that became a very cultured city and it's pretty close to obviously that German is the language, there's no Austrian language, it's German, you know. Hungary, they have a if you ever hear somebody speaking, what? It's very, very different. Well, that's where you came is inherently that part of the world. But they were no longer aware of the changes which were taking place in the languages in Germany. I mean, every language developed over time, and words are introduced. They were thrown back more and more upon their Hebrew, okay? Because Hebrew, until the state of Israel, there are lots of new words in the language. Starts as Ben Yehuda earlier in the 20th century, but it became a very pure language. Hebrew it wasn't changed, over time. Never having mixed with German, but any German individual, there would have still been some changes in Germany. But these Jews are now living in Eastern Europe. So, they're even when you think about Ladino is a mixture of this very old Spanish. I don't think if you went to Spain and you were speaking Ladino that they would understand what so and they pride themselves, they love their food, especially now that there's a great pride, in Ladino, in Jews from the Ottoman Empire. So it's not Spanish Portuguese Jews. If anything, they so Portuguese, right? It's Ladino. Okay. Slavic words also became languages in the and you have to grow up. Depending where you live, your Yiddish was slightly different, right, from a Jew from another region of the country. For example, I always grew up that my mother would call stuffed cabbage the Vickers crowd. The funky sound. I don't know. A crowd I think has to be cabbage. But most people call it right. But I never heard that word. I just knew. Oh, that's a typical. Oh, okay. Um, so again, my parents, I from Northern, Poland. My mother always said they came from a place that was near Germany. I have to figure that out. Maybe originally they came from near. It was, but your Yiddish. I mean, it was right. I have no idea. The crowd I know is German. I don't know that much. A little bit that I know. But you can see again how all these other, like Ladino. I imagine perhaps Ladino. It could be if you came from Greece, you focused on Ladino, but if you came from Bulgaria, or you lived in Turkey, your Ladino might have been slightly, different, from Jews from other countries. By the 16th century, from the 1500s, as a result of all these movements and changes, the Jews of Eastern Europe spoke Yiddish. That is the lingua franca. That is the language that everybody there speaks. That is what you are speaking. The Germanic content of this language, again, is varied from province to province, almost in direct ratio to its proximity to Germany. So maybe, even though I told you my data came from a town called Suva, and I looked it up, and yeah, it's eastern, northeastern Poland, close to the Lithuanian border. I don't know. If you touch any family lore from relatives, it's not necessarily accurate. It's still part of your family. I had discussions with my husband when I went to college for other babies for 9 months old. I found the manifestos and the information. It was 18 months old, but somehow I don't know. He was under the assumption 9 months old. Okay, but it was like the proof. All right. The dramatic of this language varies depending on Germany, obviously. For example, if you lived in France, you would probably learn language, that people or Posen could be Posen, was one of the Jewish community in Poland, but it's the closest that of the Krakow's not the Posen. So I thought the use of Jews from Germany would go to Posen to learn Jesus, you know. So there obviously was definitely more German. So the few Jews who still remained in Germany also spoke Yiddish, but not exactly like that of the Polish Jews. Again, I don't know Yiddish, but I imagine if you would get together a room full of Yiddish speaking people, it would sound depending if it came out of town. It was also not like the German spoken by non-Jews. Again, you could see the barrier almost developing, over time between the native people from the country and the Jewish people because they're speaking different languages. I don't know. Go to my nails, the people there are Vietnamese. When they start laughing to each other, Vietnamese, but I feel like cut off, because they could be talking about me. So, or I think in New York, they're more like Korean, right, or Chinese, who a lot of them are kind of just wherever people settle. Young boys and men, all through Jewish history, have always received some form of instruction from early childhood. Most of them read the Torah, Hebrew, the Talmud, and other writings of the rabbis who had them written either in Hebrew or Aramaic. The bulk of them are Hebrew, right? Women, while limited in their broader education, were taught enough to consider, right? I mean, they had to know enough to be able to daven. And maybe some their life was comparatively of intellectual pursuit, even though they lived in an atmosphere with culture based on books, Christ beyond anything else. But the woman, the girls had to be trained at home by their mothers. I mean, most of the day was involved with procuring food and them preparing and cleaning that, taking care of some livestock, the fathers, the young men would have been officers. The fathers engaged in but the moms and the daughters would be speaking Yiddish on they would have been talking like they might have hired tutor, come to even to the house and teach, rudimentary Hebrew against stuff. And also you could follow, I don't know if they went to school, but you would, and you could follow, you could read the partial. Right, but things were not being written in English these days so much. Starting, I'm telling you, it comes. Yes, I'm going to talk about the center in a minute. They're no, these are needed. So help yourself. Okay, very pretty blue. So the women, love to read. So women sometimes turn to the romantic stories of knightly deeds. So they obviously got that. They have to know the native language too. I don't know where they were taught all of this. Okay. Yeah, but we're talking about a late, we're now dealing with that 16th century, the 1500s. I don't know. But they somehow they knew it. All right. And affairs of love. You know what is when I read, I do a lot of research, I read different sources. I sometimes wonder whether the author he's talking about, Jews of Poland, right? I always feel like they're mixing in things that really are from that 18th and 19th centuries, even though, you know, they're basically concentrating on, 14th, 16th, century. I'm not sure, right? Because we never parents or grandparents, but is that the way it was in the 1400s, 1500s? I'm not sure. I really can't. But this was really taking us to the high moral standards of Jewish home life. This I was a librarian for I had a master's in library science. Uh, but I would have these really strong kids come in. I mean, I'm a firm believer, that you can borrow, you can read whatever you want. It's not going to harm you. But these kids would come and they would take home a book. People would have say about cars. Would bring it back the next week. No, my mother's next need for Jewish books. So they were so limiting the types of I always felt so sad because especially the little boys coming back with like read or they want on sports. What are they going to do? But again, this is coming, from the and I have to tell you, girls, I don't know you, I did whatever I wanted. No censorship in my, you know, and I did that by own children. Not that it was, but I didn't go through, see what they very firm base, from your home life or your school life. About other people and other things. They're not leading the most acceptable lives, but that doesn't mean that you will then, turn away from it. Whatever. That's mine. All right. A leadership for women began to develop as early as the 14th century. Is that amazing? 1300s. It consisted mainly of poetic translations of books of the Bible. So this are the stories that they would have considered are appropriate. That is okay to read anything that's based on the Chumash. Of course, as you all know, when you're younger and you study Chumash, they always skip over certain projects appropriate for our tender ears. They were not necessarily translations, but rather a mixture of Bible stories and elaborations provided by their metric. Have you ever gone to a lecture? Whatever the and then these people, yes, but it's not always so. It doesn't address. If you cannot address the bona fide, it is not. It's to elaborate upon, the text, the Chumash, or other it really enhances our enjoyment of the stories, or of individuals, that are but they're not necessarily true. It's metric. Okay. With yeah. Yes. Differentiating. Yes. Absolutely. So I mean, I know this is like a kind of the schools I went to. I mean, I'm very mocked to that you really have to stop properly, and then you can, go in further exploration, to what's going on. The text first of the shot. It's beautiful in and of itself. All right. I mean, I love Drosh. So I love that. I have some but Drosh, I think, is that, or have use it. That will help you to understand how you are studying. The heroes of the Bible were made rival and even excelled their heroes' common non-Jewish romances. Piety, Jewish loyalty, and religious fervor were their most prominent themes. All these books were written in Yiddish. They were written in Yiddish. They're not in Hebrew. But again, these were books that were women who probably didn't know Hebrew, they learned it as a language. For the long time, it's called the Tena Arena. And what is Tena Arena? Based on the A, okay, you know, go out, come forth, etc. And Re'eh, see, behold. And it proved to be the most popular in Europe. It was not the first book of its century written. Several paraphrased of Chumash had preceded the efforts of this is not the actual book, put together, although there's the efforts of this Dato Luciano of was around that year. Loretta. I know. In my show where I grew up, so they moved there eventually to my and his wife was. On Shabbos, you know, she was, you know, obviously the show, but she was reading a center because she had been brought up like this, you know, for long. But again, it's not the actual text. We were talking stories. But I guess it was very exciting. In the course of time, this book assumed a sacredness, which the others, more poetic and thrilling, did not have. The Tena Arena is really an ethical and midrashic commentary on the Chumash. I've never read Tena Arena. I mean, it is in English, you know, you can read, you know, there's so much to read out there, like mind-boggling, right? It is divided as weekly partial, right? I guess that's why she brought her copy of the Tena Arena to show, you know, when she was reading it. With at least part of the intellectual activity of the men. You can see over time women very upset that they weren't receiving the higher education because they wanted to keep up. I mean, I feel I had a very good, you know, Jewish education and background. So, and the mother, discussions. I didn't see that. I really had a fabulous Jewish education. So you really have to thank, you know, the Beis Yaakov, you know, which started in Europe, because that's opened up the fact. Well, let's educate our girls. Right? So, no more and more. And again, it's all part of that because of that, which we started. We're not there yet, but that's 18th century. But we will eventually get to that. The peculiar situation of the Jews in Poland. And their cultural superiority. Well, I guess if you're the only person who can read and write and around you all these ignorant peasants, yeah, I guess, you know, would make you feel pretty good about this. Kept them from something. Would it be something probably the men knew more? Again, because I had business skills, so they would have had to know language, some degree. The Yiddish language thus became a permanent feature of their lives. You can almost say it was like became a language of the home, or but again, it had nothing to do with any non-Jews. Although they used to I can imagine even in the yeshivas, the guys are sitting there and they're reading, you know, the Gemara. But then when they have a conversation, you know, I'm sure they're speaking Yiddish to one another. That's what I think talking about Aramaic, it's kind of interesting, you know, in South. There is a but they're Chaldean, and they actually speak. They live on my block. Oh, a form of Aramaic. So my husband, my son is the love there. So he was going around the area, and so they have something with us, you know, set up his house was. So then they know his Aramean. So not my husband, there's other like my son, but this other man who he was with started speaking to him in Aramean. I don't know. Aramean. because he knew the Gemara language so well. Pretty interesting. So as a result, the man was like very impressed. He said, "All right, become Yiddish language became a permanent feature in their life. They never looked at deserving of attention. It only will become a literary language in that 19th century, and that's because and then writers Solomon Islamic you know, because they might have written some in Hebrew, but they were reading a lot in Yiddish. Okay, so it became a literary language. I remember my father saying that, I think my Zeta came from the town called Sat, which was Kovenel, but my grandmother came from Vilna, which obviously, was educated there. And my mother, who we spoke find as a more cultured than that father would have spoken. Okay, they used it for everything. All right, but they didn't sound like they wouldn't have a grammar book on Yiddish, right? They wouldn't have studied it as a language, even different in vocabulary, especially in pronunciation from province to province, even from town to town. Yiddish never developed any fixed forms, let alone a grammar. I mean, it does eventually. You can take a Yiddish course, ich, du, I don't know, a little bit. I took a fun. No. As the unit for writing, following the name of even all those the most magnificent foreign that come out in studying from a Polish Hebrew, my dad right to him my Polish one beautifully. Hebrew was still the accepted language, and this is still this form. Jew, Hebrew was and remained the holy tongue, right? So Lashon HaKodesh. Not till the middle of the 19th century, that you see this change, did Yiddish receive recognition as a bona fide cultural language. And then you have theater, and there's going to be this unbelievable flower. But all those of us from Eastern European heritage, when they came to America, Lower East Side, they're all speaking Yiddish, but they sent the children to public school. They wanted them to learn English, but it was very hard. It's hard for any older person to move to. I know some people actually made Aliyah, but as older people, and they can't speak Hebrew. I mean, thank God so many Israelis, know English, so you can get, around all right. But they just can't. I remember when my year in Israel was 66, 67, and going on the street, I heard people speaking German. So they were German Jews, right? They might have come already in the 1930s, and they emigrated to Israel, but they spoke German. So, Hebrew, but it wasn't, comfortable. German Israel, but they're speaking Yiddish. So it's always fascinating to see how languages develop. And this is a very unique language to the Jewish people. It was kind of poo-pooed at some point. It's beautiful for Hebrew, but there's so many rich tonalities to the Yiddish language. I'm sorry, I really don't know it. I did told I once tried to take a class here. I sort of read Yiddish, but no, but like the aleph is off, the ayin is there. I mean, you have to know how to Oh, to show for the for that reason. Yeah. So my father used to get the morning journal, and there was another one. Oh, the forward. So he used to. He always used to get the. He always. I mean, he got all kinds of things in English or Hebrew, and he liked his Yiddish paper. I don't know if you're around it. Forward still. Oh, it's in English now. Oh, so it's lost that over the years. So that's you know, in for doing you know, throughout the world. I don't know, obviously. Well, they had the opposite, which was Yiddish. What was? Was called Workman's Circle. Oh, yeah. But that was part of the Bundes movement, right? Yeah. Right, yeah. They were socialists. Right, they were social. That's why so many early Jews became communists. Because look, they're talking about freedom and equality and these things that, you know, sounded wonderful. On paper, it sounded great, right? Oh, they had terrible. They were coming from awful conditions. Anyway, so let me say goodbye to my friend Irene. Turn this off. Bye, Irene. Take it easy. I know she's still there enough.